Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to CSIS. I'm Jake Harrington. I'm a fellow here in the International Security Program. Before we get started, because we're having one of our largest in-person events in the last couple of years here at CSIS, I just wanted to make one note for our guests here that in the event of an emergency, there are emergency exits located on the left and right sides of the wall behind me, and that's where we'll go in the event anything happens. But with that, I'm just really excited to welcome you all here today for this event focused on the intersection of artificial intelligence and national security. We'll be discussing a range of topics today with leaders at the forefront of some of what are really the most consequential technology and national security challenges of our era. Anybody who's read U.S. national security, defense, or intelligence strategy issued over the past few years is well aware of the pronounced role that emerging tech and AI play across all of these documents. AI is at the heart of the U.S. defense strategy, central to the concepts of integrated deterrence, the joint all-domain command and control concept, and the increasing priority of information dominance and information advantage across the entire continuum of competition, crisis, and conflict. Similarly, AI is central to current and future intelligence efforts. The global data environment is just too dense and too complex for humans alone to identify emerging threats and deliver accurate warning to decision makers. This is an area that we've studied closely here at CSIS in the past few years, and it's one that will continue to be a priority for the IC. And AI is also at the heart of U.S. diplomatic strategy. One of the administration's priorities is to work with partners and allies to promote global norms around the use of emerging technology. This includes efforts to promote so-called democracy-affirming technologies that reflect democratic values such as transparency, privacy, fairness, and due process. And in this way, emerging tech and AI is directly tied to broader U.S. efforts to promote democracy, combat authoritarianism, and uphold the rules-based order. All of these priorities are being pursued against a backdrop where others, China foremost amongst them, also recognize the immense strategic advantage that leadership in AI brings. And they're investing heavily in their own efforts to lead the world in these technologies. So we're seeing the consequences of what happens when these systems are developed by authoritarian states and deployed against their own populations. As Secretary of State Blinken recently stated, quote, Beijing has perfected mass surveillance within China and exported that technology to more than 80 countries. So our focus today is going to be on how the U.S. should navigate a series of countervailing trends. There's urgency to innovate, to bring to bear the technologies the U.S. needs to sustain its information and military advantages in an era of renewed geopolitical competition. But this rapid innovation and adoption must be done responsibly and ethically. Our national security depends on AI, but we risk undermining our global leadership if we fail to build and deploy these capabilities in ways that reflect our values. And finally, if that weren't enough, these systems need to be able to withstand sophisticated vectors of attack like data poisoning, algorithm manipulation, intended to degrade the tools and undermine our confidence in their outcomes. So it's no small challenge, but it is a goal that everyone on this panel is contributing to in a really significant way. So thanks to all of you again for being here today and for your leadership on these issues. And so before I turn it over to each of our panelists to deliver a few opening remarks of their own, I did want to extend my sincere thanks to Neil, Sarah Briani, and Calypso AI for sponsoring our event today. Neil, did you have any welcoming remarks that you wanted to add?
Yeah, of course. So I'd love to start by just thanking CSIS for putting on this wonderful event and for kind of being the central convener of all of us here today. I really want to thank everyone for coming. We at Calypso AI, playing in the national security space and really focused on creating warfighter trust through AI validation and verification, are really excited about the conversation and looking forward to everyone's perspectives. Thanks.
Okay, so let me just go ahead and introduce these folks so we can hear from them, because that's what we're here for. First, we have Margaret Palmieri. Ms. Palmieri is the Deputy Chief Digital and AI Officer at the U.S. Department of Defense. Prior to taking on this role, she served as Special Assistant to the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, and before that as Director of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Action Group. And previously, she founded and directed the Navy Digital Warfare Office. Margie, thank you so much for being here. Next, we have Jane Pinellas. Dr. Pinellas is the Chief of AI Assurance in the Office of the Chief Digital and AI Officer at the Department of Defense. Previously, she was Chief of Test and Evaluation of AI/ML at the DoD Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, the JAIC, where she designed and oversaw the stand-up of government research program to ensure that DoD builds assured and trustworthy AI-enabled systems. Thanks for being here, Jane. Next, we have Paul P.J. Makish. Dr. Makish is the Senior Director for Future Technology Platforms at the Special Competitive Studies Project, SCSP. Dr. Makish was previously a Senior Military Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies at the National Defense University, from which he was detailed full-time to the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. Thanks for being here. Next, we have David Spirk. Mr. Spirk most recently served as the Department of Defense Chief Data Officer, where he developed the Office of the Secretary of Defense's data strategy, and his analysis of data-driven efforts led to the establishment of the DoD's Chief Digital and AI Officer. Dave currently serves as a senior advisor at Calypso AI, and he's also a former Marine and served in several senior intelligence roles in the Marine Corps and at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Dave, thanks for being here. And then Neil Sarabriani. Neil is the founder and CEO of Calypso AI, a technology company that builds machine learning, testing, and validation tools. Neil previously worked on AI and innovation initiatives at DoD, and he holds multiple patents in the space of machine learning. So thank you all so much for being here. As you can tell, this is a really stellar group to talk about all of these trends and topics. And so we will start with Margie to give us our first remarks.
All right. Well, thanks for having me and Jane here on behalf of CDAO. Really just a couple opening things on the Chief Digital and AI Office and what we're focused on. Thanks to Dave Spirk and some others inside the Pentagon having kind of charted the way with data and AI, in addition to the JAIC, the Defense Digital Service, and this team called the Advana team inside the Comptroller that really stood up to look at how we had a more data-driven audit. The department has been engaged in data analytics and AI for quite a few years. I think under last year, there was a realization that bringing these efforts together would really give the department the ability to pull multiple levers and coordinate multiple levers of change that were necessary to do this at scale. And a lot of times we talk about, when you start down this path, a use case or pilot project-driven approach is necessary. We have to kind of get our feet wet and test it out. And we've been doing that for the last few years. And it's time now to look at the institutional and systemic pieces necessary to really scale this up across the department and make the department a world-class organization for doing this kind of technology, but really more mission execution enabled by data, AI, and analytics. And so we have kind of four functional areas. We're responsible for data and policy, strategy and policy associated with data analytics and AI. We have the task of removing barriers across the department when it comes to being able to use those technologies and approaches to supporting our mission, both on the warfighting side and on the business side. We are responsible for delivering enterprise capability throughout DoD, which makes us a different kind of Office of Secretary of Defense element that coming from the Navy, getting used to an OSD component that can provision capability is actually really exciting because we can look at those gaps and seams that may exist between services or where the department is not covering down and really think about what's missing there or what we can do to bring those together. We also have the responsibility of scaling solutions that work across the department. And so we know that in the services and the components, the combatant commands, the field activities, there is work going on that is really fantastic, but elevating that up and either repurposing it and scaling it or taking those lessons, good or bad, and bringing them across the department is a big opportunity for us. So those are the four areas. We also get this designation of being a demanding customer of other elements of OSD and the Defense Department to say, hey, in order for us to do data analytics and AI, we really need things that are not within that purview, whether it's networks or compute or policy, personnel type things that exist that we can call on the department for support in those areas. And being a co-equal with those other divisions is really exciting so that we have that seat at the table to voice those either barriers or opportunities as they come up. So really looking forward to your questions. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. Jane.
I'm really excited for this conversation with the rest of the panelists. So at the CDAO, I'm the Chief of AI Assurance. It's a relatively new term, so I thought I'd spend just a few minutes kind of defining what it means to us. Within our AI assurance umbrella at CDAO, we have our test and evaluation and responsible AI portfolios. But the goal of AI assurance, is it? Okay. The goal of AI assurance is really to provide the arguments and evidence that enable our different stakeholders, like the warfighter, the American public, our international allies, our acquisition officials, our commanders, to have justified confidence in our systems, that those systems meet both technical requirements that we usually test in developmental tests, but also operational requirements, mission requirements of effectiveness, suitability, and survivability. And that they do this through ethical action. And so within our test and evaluation portfolio, we not only test the capabilities that CDAO, or formerly the JAIC, actually procures, but we also come up with frameworks, with methods, and with actual tools for testing, whether it's testing integrity of our systems or robustness to natural perturbations or resiliency against adversarial action. We also have a very robust human system integration framework that is tied very closely to our responsible AI principles. Our Department of Defense was the first Department of Defense to adopt ethical principles for artificial intelligence. We did this in February of 2020. Since then, multiple nations have followed suit. And I know we'll get to this a little bit later in this conversation, but over the last 2 years, what we've been working on is a more detailed idea of how we actually implement and operationalize responsible AI across the department. And where that overlaps with test and evaluation, and where there are additional arguments and evidence that need to be built to, again, assure our various stakeholders and create that justified confidence that our systems will be an asset and not a liability.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks, first of all, Jake, CSIS, and Calypso for putting us all together for this dialogue we're having with each other and with you. What I thought I would share just briefly is 3 different lenses that gave me a sense of the significance of the global trends and the challenges and why we're all here today. So the first lens is basically historical. When I was detailed to the staff, the AI Commission, we looked back at the history of general purpose technologies. Sometimes they're called the versions of the Industrial Revolution, but they basically go mechanization and the creation of the steam engine, 1780. You have electrification and the existence of grids in the 1880s with AC. You have it spreading across the nation by 1890s. If you go fast forward, the next big leap happens with automation. You should imagine in your minds factories producing cars, even in the 70s, with automated arms. That happened long before AI has its recent bloom. And then in between 1986 and 1991, you have the first website. And so you have the beginning of digitization. And so from mechanization, electrification, automation, and digitization, you have these giant eras of general purpose technologies that pervade society. And so the question is that fifth one intelligentization? Will AI, riding that digital backbone, become the next big part of everything we have to think about in national security? I take note that each one of those leaps in general purpose technology are still with us in national security. We have machines, we use electricity, we use automation before AI. We have a cyber domain now, and now we have the antithesis of AI. A second way that we gained perspective on the AI Commission about this was a technical perspective that, as Dave has said before, AI is not just an application, it's this stack. And when you consider it across a stack, it is a vast topic. It includes data and data science, how it's stored, transported, secured. It involves compute, all 3 paradigms of compute, not just the silicon we use today. It involves exquisite algorithms. We talk about them with names like GPT-3. It involves applications. People have domain expert to bring it to bear. And then it involves integration and exquisite engineering for those who do that for a living. And then finally, the talent for each one of those is completely different. That is called the AI stack. AI is beyond an application. It's a vast subject. And so we need to intrude upon it. In some sense, it's helpful to think about it through that lens. And the last lens that gave me perspective about it when we thought about it at the Commission was really something that Bob Work offered when he was Deputy Secretary of Defense about how to think about warfare. When you think about one technical capability, it doesn't affect just a grid of war, but it happens across something like 5 grids: a sensor grid, a fires or an effects grid, a command and control grid, a logistics grid, and what he learned from studying the PRC, an information contestation grid, where AI could be brought to bear. There's not one of those grids that is likely to be untouched, and if you study the market, you can see AI applications on each one of those grids. For example, in the sensor grid, you can see Tesla overcoming something called the transference problem, which is fusing data from many different sensors. On the logistics grid, you can see Amazon experimenting with drone delivery. You can see advanced manufacturing and 3D printing. On the command and control grid, going way back to 2009, DARPA was experimenting with something called Deep Green. And I could go on. The fact is, when you talk about AI and national security, it goes across all the grids of war. So it's a large stack, it goes across all the grids of war, and we're probably discussing a general purpose technology that people will reflect on, many years from now. So those are three different lenses to kind of set the significance of why we talk about it today.
Dave, over to you.
The mic's on. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so I think, it's hard to follow those comments because we have the real professionals doing the real work, today who are learning. Every day that I'm away from the department, I'm less and less informed of the progress that you're making inside of it. And that's exciting because they are accelerating in the space. I think that one of the important things that we do still have to just remember and talk about is why we're speaking about this with the urgency with which we are. We have a pacing threat. We have other nation states now who want to move faster in this space because they believe that is their advantage to jump in front of, Western society and the freedom and values that we embrace today. This is the new battle space. This is the new general purpose technology that we need to move into. And so, I'll speak from inside the department, inside the Intel community. One of the things that I think we always have to remember is that with AI, what we're really talking about is speed. Speed of decision making, period, full stop. That's what this technology gives us. Whether that's at a tactical unit or whether that's in the halls of the Pentagon. This is about speed and it's about precision. And if we nail the stack, if we get it all right across all of those components, then what we're going to find is that we stay out in front of our competitors. I do not think that we're behind. I've had a lot of people talk about, oh, the U.S. is behind, the U.S. has lost its advantage. I don't think we're behind, but I think if we don't continue to speed up, that we will find ourselves in a position of parity that we're not looking for. And so I think what we're looking to do now, and I recently spoke about this, is look at those components that we can really focus on and focus the department on at the right level, at echelon, so that if we can continue to get these pieces right, then we continue to allow those operators to invent what that future is with this general purpose technology. The first one is focus on talent. There's a lot of initiatives that are underway inside the department, inside the military services that are really exciting, that have a brand new generation of leaders coming in to be those demanding customers that Margie talked about. And so really we need to double down on that. Look at how we can take our data fluency initiatives and begin to incentivize those like we did when we recognized we needed more Arabic speakers in the Middle East after September 11th, 2001. How do we begin to not only provide opportunities for people to increase their data fluency, but how do we actually, give them extra pay in their paychecks? How do we have a new version of a command run where commanders are actually sitting down on a Friday instead of going on a jog with their troops, but literally sitting down with someone like Neil and saying, hey, explain trustable AI to me. What does that mean? Why do we care about it? So I think as you see that data fluency improve, the exciting thing about when you learn a language is you also understand a culture and the cultural change starts occurring. So I think you're starting to see a lot of those edges in the formation at echelon, and that's an exciting time. The second is holding the CIOs accountable, right? Margie said it. That's what you can write down. Margie said CIOs need to be held accountable. But the reality is, we do have a stack that isn't up to the challenge today. Now, the CIOs are working very hard to change that. They understand that there's a new customer in town. They understand that there's a new requirement that they did not plan for. But we have to continuously encourage that positive stress of, push and pull inside that, because what we do understand is that our commercial cloud compute is a national security treasure, and we need to get that into the hands of our warfighters, period. When you go beyond that, I think you start to think about, different funding mechanisms. How can we get around the PPB process so that we can exercise faster in the workspace, but really it gets down to the funds that I want to leverage, the funds that we need to partner with Congress to make more fluid so we can make bets and take bets like a VC would, really are to facilitate that continuous campaign of learning live in our formation. Not in a lab, not in a non-warfighting element, but literally get the technology into the hands of our forces that are operating in the real world, because with that, the policy and strategy divisions that Margie and the team start to work with, can use the power of the pen with a lot of precision to move obstacles in near real time, and we can continue that acceleration of the technology.
Well, that was certainly hard to follow. Fundamentally, exactly as Dave outlined, it's all about high consequence decisions made effectively and made quickly. And the question that naturally occurs is, how do you have speed of decision making? Meaning, how do you get models deployed in the right places, at the right times, with the right operational technologies deployed with them? And how do you make sure that they're safe? How do you make sure that they're robust? And most importantly, how do you make sure that they garner the warfighter's trust? And one of the really kind of unique things, I think, really due to much to the work of the folks here on this panel, is making sure that there is a process for ensuring that we're going to garner warfighters' trust, for putting together the policies, the methods, the procedures that enable for that to happen, and then looking out at the private sector, and there are other companies in addition to us, looking out at all of the companies out there and saying who has the best technology, who has the best capability set, and who can ultimately help us solve our most high criticality problems in the best and most effective way possible.
Outstanding. Thanks to all of you. This is going to be just a fantastic discussion. We're going to cover a lot of ground. I'd like to start at the strategic level to sort of just continue to set the framework for what are we doing, what are we trying to accomplish, and what are the stakes. So Marge, if I can start with you, we're all obviously really eagerly anticipating the full unclassified national defense strategy, but the March 22 fact sheet clearly shows that AI is going to be at the core of all of the three primary pillars there. So that's integrated deterrence, campaigning, and building our enduring advantage. Can you share some of your thoughts on how you think AI and the efforts specifically that CDAO is undertaking are going to contribute to the strategy? And obviously the rest of the panel should feel free to jump in to add their thoughts as well, but we'll start with you. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks. So I'm going to take it back a little bit pre-AI to just basic data and analytics. And I think without a doubt, data analytics and AI will play a role in the NDS. I wanted to start with data and analytics because if we do not have high quality data or the access to data from multiple different places in the department, we really can't put together the AI capability that we're going to need to be trusted and rely upon. And so a lot of the focus that we have is how do we get the right data quality and data access, because it is distributed across the department. We have the data decrees that say, data is an enterprise asset. Putting that into practice is always a little bit more of a contact sport than policy would imply. But it really opens the door and unlocks the potential for different insights and innovation as we start to integrate data from different parts of the department. So we're very focused on that. There is our director, Dr. Craig Martell, he came in from LIFT, computer science, PhD, former professor, understands the entire stack, which is actually really exciting. Also understands the outcome-driven business side of how to manage an organization and the cultural aspects that are necessary to get this done. And so really excited to have him come into the organization and be able to weave through all those different aspects of putting strategy implementation into practice in a very data-driven and metrics-focused way. And so a lot of the conversations we're having now are, what are the right measures? Do we really understand our current baseline? And how do we start to take action and measure our progress towards those outcomes over time? And so within the services, within the combatant commands, and within the OSD staff element and service and field activity element, as kind of our primary customers or executors of the NDS, what are their key priorities and how are we going to understand where we are and where we need to go in terms of outcomes, and then what are the right measures? How do we map the data to that and really give ourselves a good understanding of where we are and where we want to go and how to move the needle. And that feedback loop, which seems so common sense that you would do this, is not always there, because with change of administration, change of, especially in the military, change of leader, even on the civilian and political side, sometimes we lose that continuity. And so being able to really support the NDS with those plans that are going to be able to be handed off from leader to leader, from team to team, and take that learning mindset to say, okay, we tried this action, the needle's not moving, what do we do differently? Because we have that feedback loop is huge. Without a doubt, the Deputy Secretary also signed a memo on ADA, AI, and Data Acceleration Initiative, brainchild of maybe one person up here on the panel, Dave. This was really about putting that data and AI expertise forward at the combatant commands, where we can really look at their workflows and how they make decisions. Again, getting into how fast do you want this process to work? What type of insights do you want to have that you don't have right now? And how do we start to connect their decision-making process down to the sensor level? A lot of times in the military we talk about sensor to shooter. General Van Herk at Northcom says, hey, it's also sensor to decision maker. And we've got to think about both of those chains of activity and information and make that more interoperable. So data quality and access, really big. Digital talent management is going to be huge for the department. Really excited that we have the opportunity in CDAO to look at this from a joint and service and civilian perspective in ways that you can't really manage if you're in a service individually. You can make some dent in it, but not strategically across the department. And then delivering those products to customers that are really going to start to make a difference in how the department makes decisions from the business side to the warfare side.
Dave, I'd like to get you in on this conversation, on this line of conversation, in particular on the data quality and access issues. Obviously, the Deputy Secretary has made clear through the data decrees and other documentation the strategic importance of data for the department. But we all know, cultural resistance to share, security around that, security issues around classification, around cybersecurity for protecting the data. What are your thoughts on sort of how the department has matured in getting to that place where that data is more available, it's more discoverable, and it's more easily integrated into these systems that we're hoping will be able to deliver this decision advantage?
Yeah. So I'll start out. I'll start out at a basic level, and then I'll get a little provocative at the end, just because I don't have to go through a PAO or Ledge Affairs anymore. I think if you look at where we started several years ago, and that's an important data point. None of this is new in the department. I think the last time I sat on a stage with Margie was probably over 4 years ago now, almost, where she was down at SOCOM, and we were talking about SOCOM kind of starting on their journey that began because Lieutenant General Jack Shanahan and Drew Kukor showed up at SOCOM headquarters and said, we have a crazy idea, can we try it live in your formation? General Tony Thomas got excited, and so you go all the way back, and there were programs even before that began pathfinding in this place. So it's not a 0 to 60 race that we're in right now. It's how do we pick up steam with those things that people who came before us, laid down, and how do we continue kind of taking those lessons learned and understanding that's more valuable than the models that we've built, as Jane and I were talking about in the green room earlier. Every organization has to go from becoming data informed to data driven to data led. As your data becomes more mature, as you can produce more repeatable, testable, trustable data workflows, then you can begin adding more and more complex models on top of that data that allow you to move, almost from a data analytics to a machine learning to a general technology type of artificial intelligence. And so I think the department is well on its way there through some of the great work that the Advana team has done in really wrestling around the data, using the data decrees as a bit of a carrot and a stick, to find the locations that maybe are having a little bit of a cultural issue and don't necessarily want to share their data. But it was probably 9 months ago that we were sitting in a Deputies Management and Action Group, the senior decision-making body that the Deputy Secretary of Defense herself hosts. And I won't understate how important her personal involvement in all of this has been, period. Secretary Norquist absolutely before her. But when you have that level of top cover and you're in a position like Margie or Jane are today, I was yesterday, you find that there's not a lot of people who will say no to you, because when you have a monthly report back to the DepSecDef about noncompliance, it's a pretty quick phone call to their bosses that, hey, are you really not going to share that data? But so I think about 9 months ago, I told the DepSecDef and the Vice, General Heighton at the time, that I think we've moved past the cultural issue associated with data sharing. What I really find now is when we are confronted with an issue because we want to do a data analytics, we want to build a model, it's not a lack of wanting, we have 30 years of technical debt that won't allow us to share that data. I know when I'm going to sunset this system, so why would I spend millions of dollars updating it so that you can create this decision? Is it really important enough? And sometimes, honestly, it's just that the data quality is so bad. They want to make sure you're not going to try and make a decision with data that is just of such a low quality that they're worried the data will lead you to a wrong decision. So I think we're past cultural. I think it's more technical and resource issues now with why we aren't accelerating faster. But as I said, I think we are accelerating.
Thanks so much. And so we've talked about sort of what we're trying to accomplish, what are some of the barriers to get there. And Jane, you're sort of responsible for putting these pieces together to operationalize these capabilities, but doing so in a way that reflects the ethics and transparency and best practices that we've talked about. And so, this has been a really busy month for the CDAO, for data analytics and AI at the Pentagon. Obviously, the CDAO has now been up and running for a few weeks, and just last week, your office released the Responsible AI Strategy and Implementation Pathway, which is a really important milestone in implementing the AI ethical principles, which you mentioned during open remarks, one of the first documents of this nature ever released by a Department of Defense. So we'd be really interested in how you're sort of navigating the operationalization of AI in this space, and particularly your thoughts on sort of how innovation and harnessing innovation and promoting rapid innovation and bringing these capabilities to bear is done in ways that we can ensure that the systems are both safe and that they're trustworthy.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So indeed, just less than a week ago, we have released our Responsible AI Strategy and Implementation Pathway. And so that's the guiding document now for implementing responsible AI, for operationalizing responsible AI across the Department of Defense. It advises us to operationalize our AI across 6 tenets. So anything from governing responsible AI and the involvement of the various organizations and governance of responsible AI across the department and actually holding people accountable, to properly calibrating warfighter trust, and that's the connection to test and evaluation, which is what we discussed earlier, to inserting ourselves into the product and acquisition lifecycle, right? Writing contract language that holds our vendors accountable to responsible AI principles, figuring out how to source AI responsibly as well, validating requirements and making CDAO and our responsible AI part of the JROC process, creating a responsible AI ecosystem. This has to do with our international allies, right? We're now working in partnership with 16 other nations. And on top of that, we have several bilateral communications and agreements and collaborations going because we really strive to be a leader in the space of responsible AI. And then finally, the most important piece is the responsible AI workforce, including responsible AI training into every training that CDAO provides, but also having specialized training for CDAO, for the rest of the department, and for our partners, because at the center of it all has to be people, right? Recruiting, retaining the right workforce, training the workforce that already exists in the DoD and responsible AI practices. Responsible AI really is not a destination, right? It's a journey, and we all have to be part of that journey, and so we have to train our workforce to be part of that. The document that was released doesn't just provide the guidance and doesn't just provide kind of the requirements. It also alerts the readers to some of the tools that we've been able to assemble so far. And of course, we will keep working on expanding that toolkit. One of the first pieces in the toolkit is the Defense Innovation Unit's Responsible AI Guidance. And that's a great document that really seeks to explain and operationalize responsible AI principles. They give great examples of very specific projects and how responsible AI guidelines apply to those specific projects. They have some worksheets and kind of help you think through how you might go about implementing responsible AI principles across a particular project. But we also have templates for how to design a project, templates for model cards and data cards, basic documentation, which by the way is just part of the traceable principle. And then we have our very robust human system integration framework that I mentioned previously, in which we talk about the importance of things like information quality and making the right type of information available to the warfighter at the right time in the way that they understand, making sure that they know how to govern their system properly, making sure they are aware when the system starts functioning outside of what's expected, making sure they have a way to turn it off if that happens and function without it. That's the governability principle, right? Or at least there's a close relationship there. But also making sure that we allocate functions responsibly between the human and the machine. Understanding that we need to optimize the entire system of human and machine rather than automate things that are just easy to automate. Things like calibrating the workload, right? You want the warfighter engaged. You don't want them working so hard that they're shedding tasks, but you also don't want them asleep at their desk, right? You want them exactly engaged in the right way. So all of this falls into a human factors framework, and I want to emphasize that here today because I think some people mistakenly think that if we outsource some of our responsibilities, some of our actions to a system, to a machine, then all of a sudden human factors become less important. In fact, they become a lot more important because now we have, as a human, you have limited context, limited interaction potentially with something that is your decision aid. So we really place a really big emphasis on human factors and how that connects to responsible AI. So we have this document now that, again, that outlines the tools available and also the responsibilities for multiple organizations across the Department of Defense. And so the next question is, is this a way for us to stifle innovation, right? Are we going to slow things down by introducing all of these processes? And that's a perception that we've been fighting in test and evaluation, even of traditional systems, for some time, because it is literally our job to find what's wrong with the system. But the truth is that it's our job to find it throughout its development cycle, right, to avoid that technical debt down the line, and to actually diagnose and localize issues early so that they can be fixed. Because of our values as a nation, we're never going to field a system, right, quickly at the cost of ensuring that it's safe, that it's secure, and that it's effective. And so to that end, and to the extent that AI is a relatively new technology, and experimentation and testing actually allows us to learn more about their operational envelopes, to ensure that our systems are failing gracefully, to discover ways in which we can mitigate failures of these systems. To that end, I would argue that rigorous test and evaluation, that implementing these responsible AI guidelines is actually an asymmetric advantage over our adversary. And I would argue that we don't need to be the fastest, we need to be fast enough, and we need to be better.
That's a perfect segue because I want to bring PJ and Neil in on the conversation to talk more broadly about the external environment. So PJ, I'll start with you. You obviously, your experience with NSCAI and the work done around there about the importance of the AI, global AI and technology competition, and now you're at SCSP extending that work on American competitiveness and technology. From your perspective, from that work, from the work you're doing now, and looking kind of at the global landscape of AI adoption, how do you see trends across the defense, intelligence, national security space playing out globally? And how do you think adversaries are seeking to leverage AI to drive their competitive advantage against the United States?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jay. It's a great question. I think, first of all, building on something that was said earlier, they see it as an offset. So authoritarian regimes, the two largest in the world, see artificial intelligence as an offset to U.S. power. Personally, I think it's an offset to U.S. expeditionary power, specifically in the military instrument, that they view it that way. I think the 2017 documents that declared how these regimes view technology was correct, meaning describing Russia as the assertive threat and the PRC as the pacing threat in these technology challenges is bearing out 5 years later. I think when we look across that, specifically if we were to zero in on just China, for example, just tell me if these competition factors seem agreeable to you. What you have there is a nation that has a 14-year plan to seek global supremacy in the technology that doesn't require interpretation. That's an out loud declaration of a strategy and a plan. Started in 2017, is underway fully. Second, this is a nation that's invested. And while some people have studied what is the exact number, I think what's safe to claim and easy to understand is that this is not only a nation with a plan, they put resources behind it long before we did at a sort of a national level. I think if you look at the leader in terms of a competition factor, in Xi Jinping, you see someone who sees himself as a historical figure that needs to restore prestige in general, which technological advantage would do. That's a competition factor. This is a leader that's conversant in the technology and does that. This is a nation, if you only look at the Central Committee, which is studied of the United States. They are a studied rival in this technology space. And in addition to studying, we know there's been a lot of studies about how knowledge transfer from AI and associated emerging disruptive technologies is systematic and underway, not only in the United States, but globally. You could go on to say, not only are you talking about these competition factors, but a nation that has something like moonshots called mega projects in this space that have been long underway now. This is not 2022. And then finally, not only are they pursuing these mega projects, but they're sitting on top of what by some measures are the second largest economy in the world. So those are just some clinical competition factors of what we face as a nation. And so the global trend and the arc is, how much is the PRC or Russia in all of their experimentation, from the Uran 9 to what they're experimenting with now in 9, truly putting action behind words in the competition. And I think that arc is substantial. We could talk about specific fielding to go, which is what I think the ultimate measure of advantage is what you actually field. Everything else is sort of mythical when the rubber hits the road. China is fielding fantastic AI systems, not just in the military, but through big public-private partnerships like the Beijing Academy of Artificial Intelligence. And they are out loud saying they have bold technology objectives that are even generally artificially intelligent. So this is not interpretive. These are just sort of the clinical facts of the competition. And I think that shows the general arc is that it's a competition which is defining our era. This plus other emerging technologies like biotech could affect the destiny of nations in the long run. It's that heavy.
Neil, so you bring the industry perspective in here, right? So obviously you've been a long time in the technology, the AI industry, with the nexus to these national security and defense issues. So as you look at sort of just the global market, the global trends in AI, where do you see some of the key aspects of the global AI ML ecosystem, and what are some of the lessons that you think that those have for AI and the U.S. government and defense and intelligence?
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Jake. And PJ, that was a terrific response there. Ultimately, I think you probably have to start with the primitive that any advantage in AI on the defense side of the house can and is likely coming out of an advantage in a completely unrelated domain. AI, unlike most technologies that we talk about in the context of defense, is primarily making its advancements in completely unrelated sectors and unrelated fields. And so I think it makes sense to talk about what is happening out there. What are the primitives that potentially have nothing to do with defense right now, but are really going to affect things on the go forward? And a couple of just the macro trends that we spend a lot of time thinking about are as follows. One, we spend a lot of time thinking about what are called foundation models. And foundation models are essentially these really, really large models that companies like Google create or companies like Amazon create. They cost tens of millions to hundreds of millions of dollars to train, and they're enormous. GPT-3 would be a terrific example of a foundation model. DALL-E 2 would also be a really good example. And ultimately you have a couple of things happen with these really large models. One, you don't necessarily know where the data for those models comes from, and just as easily you have foundation models being made by actors that are not as friendly to US interests. And so you end up with a traceability problem where you have these really large foundation models powering machine learning development, and you don't necessarily know what the originating source of those foundation models are and what the potential vulnerabilities that having those foundation models brings to bear are. So I think it makes sense to talk about that as kind of one, primitive that underlies things. Two, it's all about how is AI being used for high consequence decisions? So ultimately, I think when we look at the future, we see some really sophisticated applications of AI, but we also see a lot of day-to-day, let's call them business applications or business problems that are frequently being solved by the fact that machine learning model creation, thanks to foundation models, thanks to AutoML tools, are becoming increasingly easy and increasingly simple to create. And so you're ending up in a world in which you have these really large foundation models, and you don't necessarily know where these foundation models are originating from. The aperture of who can actually create machine learning models is increasing. So the democratization of machine learning, if we're putting it in a one-sentence descriptor, and you have a greater and greater number of threats, both in the form of adversarial machine learning threats, or folks being able to attack the machine learning model, and in the form of an increasingly large number of people creating machine learning models without the primitives or perhaps all of the knowledge of the impact of their decisions that you saw previously. And we're seeing this not just in the kind of US defense concept, we're also seeing this internationally with other nation states making high consequence decisions, and we're also seeing this in other high consequence areas like pharmaceuticals or financial services or other places where there are real significant consequences for the decisions you're making with models.
This has been a great. I think we've covered so much ground here. We've talked about where the U.S. is going, how it's going to get there, what the stakes, where the technology is going. I'm curious, and I'll open this up for the group. I mean, we talk about competitive advantage, right? If we're looking at AI capabilities through the lens of strategic technology competition, and there's a whole host of areas where we could emphasize. We could focus on concerns about adversarial activities in that space that could undermine our confidence in our models. We can talk about building and exporting democracy-affirming technologies that are there to compete in the global market space against Chinese surveillance tech that's been built and deployed against the Chinese population and then potentially exported to like-minded countries abroad. What is the plan for the U.S. and allies to potentially fill in that space? I'm curious if there's any further thoughts on kind of the trajectory of global technology competition as it relates to these capabilities. And then after that, I'll open it up to the floor for questions. If anybody has a question in the room, please step up to the microphone over on the side, and we can start going through audience questions. Go ahead, Dave.
I'll get started and then briefly turn it over. And I think an important piece of getting started is to acknowledge that while we have a lot of people of the Department of Defense and formerly of the Department of Defense up here, I saw Keshmendra Paul, the VA CDO, sitting out in the crowd right now. And Keshmendra was a great partner, when I was at the Department of Defense, as was Dr. Matthew Gravis at the State Department, as was the Federal CDO Council. And so I think you have a lot of things inside the U.S. Right now that really are allowing all of our data, not just the department's data, to be coming together in the interest of national security. We're all learning lessons from each other. We're all collaborating. And that goes to something that Jane said as far as, the competitive advantage of having our partners and allies alongside us, both learning from our experience where we're out ahead, but also, understanding where there's a smaller nation state who has an opportunity to move a little faster in an area, we can begin to study that and incorporate those lessons learned as well.
PJ?
Yeah, I think just using the list that you laid out, Jake, you might
think of it as the sub-competitions in AI. And so there is a values competition that's fully underway for those who are familiar with how surveillance technology is used in the PRC, particularly in Xinjiang, and other cases that are well established, say like Venezuela and the executive order there. I think there is a commercial competition going on, which is like a global battle of platforms between the large AI companies, and PRC companies are ascendant and extremely impressive in this space. I think there's a government competition here, which is really what Jane, I think, is sort of telling us about, and Dave is telling us about here, and also about the defense strategy coming out, which is how well is government doing at harnessing the technology. That's a different story. There's probably something when you combine the two, which is how is their public-private system in the PRC and the US public-private system compared? Theirs is fused by law, ours is not. Theirs is under mandate to cooperate, ours is voluntary. Theirs is highly organized in accordance with the national plan. Ours is increasingly trying to become so. And so there's probably some sort of public-private sub-competition going. And finally, there's always a competition. I wouldn't necessarily call it a competition to reduce it to that level, but in some sense, ally and partner dimension of cooperation, because we know, for example, that there is cooperation that takes place between the PRC and Russia, for example, on AI in those spaces. So those are just 5, in some sense, sub-competitions in the list, I think, that you offered.
Fantastic. And again, if anybody has any questions, please step up to the mic and I'll call on you, but I will continue to ask questions myself. Jane, Margie, I'm be interested in hearing more of your thoughts and on the importance of allies and partners around ethical AI and innovation, because obviously AI and other technological priorities are at the core of the AUKUS agreement, right? And so we've seen the UK move forward with their ethics policies across both defense and intelligence. And I'm curious whether through those multi-governmental groups that are underway, are we in a position to ensure that we actually can have true interoperability across those ethical frameworks, even if they use different terms or have different scopes, or operate under different legal frameworks?
Yeah, I'll let Jane talk specifically about some of the implementation stuff. I will say in the month and a half I've been at CDAO, we have met with our core partners, so UK, Canada, Australia. We have this Partnership for Defense initiative that has 16 nations right now, which include our Five Eyes partners, as well as our NATO partners, as well as others in addition to those. And the conversations we're having, specifically with our Five Eyes partners, are in-depth, substantive. I've worked on partnerships before, and these ones are very strong. And really thinking through not just the responsible AI piece, without a doubt, but also approaches to how you actually grow and sustain a healthy industry base in this area, and what does it really mean for our nations to have that good partnership so that we can ensure that the capability is responsible at the end of the day, and that we are using the best of our nation's talent to be able to deliver those capabilities. But I'll let Jane talk about more specifics.
No, I think that's actually a pretty good summary of it. The partnership meets quarterly, right? And responsible AI started out as the main topic of discussion. We've since discussed others as well, but it remains really at the core. And in the end of the day, as you noted correctly, we share values, right? We may call some things differently, but in the end of the day, our values are shared, and our interest in advancing AI responsibly while maintaining civil liberties, right? While involving kind of individuals and citizens into the kind of policies and the way that we shape the governance of AI. All of those are shared interests, and so we're continually learning from each other. But there is a focus, as you mentioned, on interoperability as well. And in fact, when we talk about testing our systems, when we test for integration, things like compatibility and interoperability are very high on our list with any system we provide to ensure that those international partnerships continue working.
Sir, please.
Thank you, Jake. Ernie Benner, Redgate CEO. Sitting here in CSIS, I can't help but think of the significant gift that CSIS gave for the framework of jointness in the DoD military, and how jointness changed how we thought, how we made policy, how we interacted with allies, how we drove acquisitions. What would a framework, if we are truly heading towards a strategic inflection point where competency in AI is of a national security concern, what would the framework look like for policy and legislation to drive AI as a cornerstone of the national strategy going forward?
Who wants to dive into that one?
I mean, one simple way to sort of intrude on that really good question is, in the AI Commission, there was a sense that all of the different advantages that the US holds need to be pulled together in some sort of strategic organization like a Technology Competitiveness Council. The basic argument was that at the end of World War II, the United States needed an NSC to bring together the interagency. At the end of the Cold War, there was a movement to bring together the National Economic Council to deal with the changes in the world at that time. And now, with technology at the center of these competitions, there needs to be something like a Technology Competitiveness Council that would be the intellectual continuity between administrations. And it was recently in the news that there's such thinking on the Hill. I think when you mention law and policy and strategy becoming one, that's the first recommendation that sort of jumps to mind. There's also another move on the Hill right now to create an Office of Competition Analysis, and that came out of the Senate Intelligence Committee, which looks like another move to organize us knowing how to move in such an international competition when combined with an action arm like a TCC. So I think that those are two recommendations to just open up thinking about how you bring those together to compete.
Anyone else? Next question.
Hi, good afternoon. Jasmine Al-Said. I'm a surface warfare officer in the U.S. Navy and a fellow at Palace. I'm wondering what priorities government would want to stress to the industry when it comes to responsible AI in the next 5 to 10 years and vice versa. What does industry want government to really keep in mind in this coming decade specifically to prioritize if we're going to match our capabilities with the NDS? Thank you.
I think the most important thing that we are kind of emphasizing right now is incorporating technology that already exists, right? There's no need to replicate. I think we can probably, there's certainly, the test science has not advanced for AI as much as development has itself. And so there's room for research and new techniques and new methods, but I think we could probably get 80% of the way there with existing technology and existing knowledge as long as we use it responsibly. And so to that end, we've been working, and especially our acquisitions group has been working tirelessly to create these contract vehicles that enable us to actually interact with our industry vendors. A few years ago, when I started at the JAIC, even if I had money and a test and evaluation project, I couldn't obligate. There was no contract vehicle by which I could actually get my vendor to help me. But since then, we've come a really long way. CDAO has inherited from the JAIC several contract vehicles, including Tradewinds, which is our OTA, including the test and evaluation bulk purchase agreement and the data readiness contract vehicle that really enable us to quickly compete our projects and to get kind of creme de la creme industry vendors to work with us very quickly in a fair way, right, fair competition, et cetera. And so there's a tension there in that, of course, following a presentation like this, we usually get contacted by a lot of vendors, and it's a lot to absorb of who's doing what and what really the state of the art is. But in the end of the day, I think it's a moral imperative, right, for us to take advantage of the best technology that already exists. Now, when it comes to specifically responsible AI and the implementation, operationalization, that's a really hard word, of those principles, there's some basic things like data and model cards that we've, frankly, those are open source already. There are multiple versions. We've been able to do that, right? In the very near future, where we're kind of doing okay at testing models themselves, we're focused more on how do we integrate models into systems, how do we measure things once you take your shiny new model and you integrate it onto legacy hardware that was never meant to interact with an AI system. So there's a lot of interesting problems there and how exactly you measure that. And then measuring operational performance, measuring performance in the field with a realistic adversarial representation where that exists, with a real operator. All of those are important. And then if we're looking a little bit further into the future, then and Dave, this is what you and I also discussed in the green room, the main concern is, okay, now the technology is deployed, now what? Right? Now we have to continuously monitor, we have to watch out for data drift, we have to watch out for domain shift, we have to watch out for adversarial actions. At what point do we retrain the model and how do we do that? So that's, our responsibility doesn't end with when the technology is deployed. And so focusing on that part would be also, I think, tremendously helpful.
Neil, did you want to add the industry perspective? I think there was a flip side. Is what does industry want from DoD?
Yeah, of course. That's a really great question. I think there are a couple of pieces here. One, we like solving problems. I mean, to put it that simply, knowing what the end state of what you're solving for is, or knowing what the so what of what you're solving for is important. It's important for two reasons. One, it's important from a business perspective and actually making sure that you're building the right thing, you're orienting yourself in the right way. And then two, engineers really like solving wicked hard problems. And the more you can aim them at really interesting and really hard problems that matter, the better the talent you can attract. The better the talent you can attract, the better the solutions you can create. And then two, consistency. Ultimately, we need to build a business off of helping solve really hard problems. And if we don't know if the following year or the year after that, there will still be a focus or there will be, funding lines associated with the work that's being done, it's really hard to attract the smartest folks to actually work on these problems.
Next question.
Hi, thank you guys for doing this. I'm Brandy Vincent, a reporter with FedScoop. I have been diving deep into your implementation pathway and strategy over the last week. So my question for you is, I think I noticed that the CDAO's Governing Council, which is a 4-star level governance body that's run by the CDAO, is replacing the AI Executive Steering Group that was a 3-star level governance body run by the JAIC. Can you guys talk me through what that elevation in seniority really means and what it will mean for governance, AI governance inside the CDAO?
Yeah, so when we brought together Defense Digital Service, the CDO, JAIC, and Advana, we ended up with, I think, about 22 different working groups, governance forums associated with data analytics and AI. And we have taken a look at all of those. What are they contributing? Because with 4 different organizations, everyone runs their own process. And in government, we tend to love to just add new things. And in this case, we said, let's simplify and bring that all those different governing forums under one council, which will be chaired by Dr. Martell at the 4-star level, have the service vice chiefs in it, the combatant commanders, deputies, different components of the other OSD organizations, and that's our coordination forum. So any business that we want to do on behalf of the department, that's our place to duke it out, to collaborate, to really get the feedback from all the different stakeholders we need in the organization before we bring that to the deputy. Dave talked about one of the forums by which we do that. And so it really, I think, brings more transparency to all the different efforts across the department. It allows our key stakeholders to have a voice at the table as we start to take on the systemic aspects of this in the department, and it makes sure that as we elevate issues to the deputy, everyone we can represent all those different positions in the same place. And so I think there was a headline early on, but I think it came out of the congressional hearing we did back in the spring. But we are actually reducing bureaucracy in the department, which I think is like a huge win for the CDAO coming off the gate. But now being able to put those forms into practice is our next challenge, and putting the substance on the table and getting the feedback and starting to move some of the key issues to the department is next for us.
If I can just add briefly to that, just as a piece of history to the question, elevation of the JAIC at the time was a recommendation in the AI Commission because thinking about large central innovation movements in the Pentagon, which are difficult because you have to structurally channel the Title X duties of the services, that their duty is to organize, train, and equip their services. It's not wrong, it's not a crime, it's their job. But you have to find a way to channel the innovation of all those different entities into one design for the Pentagon, let alone one design for the Pentagon and the intelligence community. So there was a historical precedent under Bob Work to pull that together under something called the Advanced Capabilities Deterrent Panel, which is what elevation felt like, and the first time that any of us knew that someone said algorithmic warfare out loud in 2016, Drew Kruger. So the question was, now that you know this, how do you actually move the entire building as one? And so that's really a short other history of why elevation matters. You have to get the innovators out of the jungle.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Jack Botine. I'm a high school student studying in DC for the summer. I'm probably a bit unconventional for this room. I had a quick question. So you guys had mentioned contracting reform as a way to speed up AI development. What are some other methods the government could take to incentivize AI development?
Yes, I think one of the biggest things we need to do, which goes back to something Neil said, is really articulate the mission outcome we want to impact as a result of employing data analytics and AI on a problem. I think when we are clear about that, it opens up the potential to innovate across the whole problem space. And I don't think we do that enough because our traditional acquisition processes are focused on systems or programs. And so you go out to develop a thing and then deliver a thing. But as Jane said, AI, living, breathing constantly, and we need to understand it in its full context and its mission context, whether that's on the business side and doing right by the taxpayers, on how we do fiscal stewardship, or whether it's on the warfare side or the decision-making side. And so making sure that we can educate our mission owners. A lot of times we talk about AI in the department, and we talk about the technology and we focus on what that looks like, and we talk about our data scientists and engineers and our UI UX developers and coders, and then there's the mission side over here that's like, can I just sprinkle some AI on it? And so we've got to elevate the understanding of how do you have an ask, and the ask is not for a technology, the ask is for the solution to a mission problem. And then I think it's incumbent upon the department not to just rush the AI engineers to the table, but to bring the network developers and the business process improvement experts and the people that understand how to manage workflows and kind of walk through and just start tackling these challenges that we have and how we really want to make an impact on the outcome. And so I'll throw that one out there, but over to others for ideas.
If I could. I completely agree with everything you said, and I think Margie, the next component of that is to continue encouraging the creativity and imagination of new concepts in the force with every integration you do. Every time you work with a domain expert in the department, and they get to understand this is what I have to do to unlock this technology, they get better, they become more demanding. And they find creative ways to apply the same thing. If you think about the first time a light bulb showed up, in the Pentagon, somebody said, hey, if it can do that, can it do this? And we've just kind of followed that into a general purpose technology. As we start to lay the groundwork, as we start to get the architecture right, the data architecture right, that allows more of that creativity, those tactical and senior leaders are going to start inventing new ways they want to leverage it that the technical experts would never come up with because they're not the domain experts. I think the other component of that is someone like you, a high school student sitting in here at CSIS, excited about this topic. We talked about a new generation of leaders coming, we see them right there. Right? And we need you involved in this space. We need you educating yourself in this space, and then we need you joining this formation.
Happy to be there. Thank you.
We're thrilled you joined us today. Thank you. I think we have time for 3 more questions. So I think that's who we have left waiting, and then we'll wrap up.
Found the act of a young person. I like that. I'm Ken Fielding with Storm Center Communications, and I'm the Director of Innovation at a geospatial mapping technology platform. And seeing Neil up there gives me encouragement to understand that there may be a platform or a real landscape for industry-driven and innovation-driven platforms to be a partner with DoD and national security on mission-critical situations. So I guess my question is, what is the real landscape for innovation and industry-driven technology solutions to play a part and to be a benefit in our national security community?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge opportunity. Again, back to the kind of the acquisition piece, where in the department we tend to write requirements and we specify down to the 100% certainty exactly the perfect solution that we want, and then we put it out there and industry gets to bid, and it really, I think, stifles innovation, to your point, because we over specify and we don't necessarily get after that problem. In CDAO, our thought is that we owe our concept of the architecture of the stack of the key capabilities that we need in DoD, and there is no reason the government needs to go develop that. We care about the integration of it. We care about the access, the ability to not get into vendor lock, to be able to look at interoperability so that we can have multiple companies engaged in such an ecosystem. But we need to give that vision out to industry, hopefully in an industry day in the future. And then invite proposals. Give us the best of what you've got to map to those core capabilities that we need, and have that competition continually going on, so that we're looking at innovation and the best of breed in that space.
Oh, it's a great question, Ken. I would just add something that one of our senior advisors at SCSP told us, which is there's probably innovation in the competition that happens in 4 ways. Innovation that naturally engenders from the market, like where you live and what you do. There's probably innovation that happens with a nudge from government, perhaps defining the problem as Neil has said. There's probably problems that only government could do, like hit the moon and return people safely to Earth alive. There's probably a 4th version, which is industry telling government that they see advantages that nobody's even talking about. And so if you can imagine combining those 4 general categories of advantage, that's something we're thinking about trying to articulate in our interim report coming out in September.
Hi, I'm Doug McKenzie. I'm with the Algorithmic Warfare Program Office, so we do quite a bit of work with each of y'all up on the stage. We've talked about the red competition, and we've talked about the blue, the friendly competition. There's not been much discussion, nor have I found any discussion on the gray. Who are the neutrals? Who are the gray, and how do we impact them? Thanks.
Yeah, I think there is clearly the entire world, our neighbors, Canada, Mexico, in their own way, Europe, in the form of the EU, in the form of NATO, in the form of independent nations, are developing plans as they come to terms with gripping this technology that's going to pervade and subtend most functions in society. In that space, we have a lot of friends. There are a lot of greens, not grays, but friends. These friends happen along spectrums, and these relationships are complex. But with the establishment of an operation that's being led by the executive branch called the TTC, with the establishment of a new branch in the State Department to think about global technology strategy with friends, with partners, I think more and more, ultimately, hopefully, what you would see emerge is something like a democracy list of ambitions in AI to achieve together with each other's competitive advantages. You could see such a world taking shape if it were so led. And so, I mean, if you look at all the different AI indices, there are a lot of players in this space. I mean, I just mentioned Canada, but they've been doing amazing things in their own national ecosystem before we really got organized as a nation to think about it with a commission. So even in our own neighborhood, there's amazing nations doing really powerful things that we could do together if we continue to kind of have that vision for the world and knit it together. But there's a lot of nations working in AI. It's hard to summarize in short, but I would say no grays, just greens, reds, and blues.
Last question is to you, sir. Hi, I'm Pranav. I'm an incoming sophomore studying global affairs at Yale and South and Central Asia research intern at Hudson Institute. So my question was about when we look at international cooperation on AI, especially with relation to China, I think an important institution to look at is the Quad, right? And we've seen a lot of discussion on AI collaboration between these countries. So I was wondering, what are y'all's thoughts on the current level of cooperation between Quad countries on AI, and more specifically, what steps you would recommend to increase that collaboration on AI, because that's going to be really important moving forward.
Anybody?
I'll start and then pass it off. I think there's a lot of coordination that's already going on. If I had to pick one area that I'd like to continue, go to the next level on, I would say it's probably on the acquisition of data that you can create training quality data sets and labels with in a more organized fashion. You know, we have partners in those regions who have an ability at different levels to collect different types of information for the purpose of developing future models, not for the purpose of supporting necessarily an operation today. And so I think anything we can do to begin to organize you know, those collection opportunities, regardless of what type of data we're talking about, whether it's spatial, whether it's tabular, but organize ourselves in that manner. That's something that I know I didn't get to, but in my time away, I've had a little bit more time to think about, you know, what if we went in and we kind of opened our books and said, I'm going to focus on this area, you focus on this area, and then we bring the data in a more organized manner for the future development of a model that we might not know we need today.
And then I think even on the model side of the house, you know, there are lots of technologies that can help enable you to share your model safely and, you know, share your model with a wider group of folks without having the risks or the issues that come with folks being able to steal your training data or any of these related kind of issues. So it almost seems like there's a policy side of the house here in terms of what do you want to accomplish, and there's a technology side of the house, both on the private side of the house and the public side of the house, of how do you do this safely, effectively, and with the biggest kind of bang for the buck.
I think to advance the Quad, as you're saying, I think you'll see it's a relatively new construct, and as it unfolds, you'll see soft and hard ways to go forward. And soft doesn't mean weak, but even if the Quad nations were to agree on the appropriate use of surveillance technology or principles to sort of lead the world to think about the clash of models that are sort of unfolding on the Earth, that's advantage. On the hard side, to go past listing of what advantage would look like in AI to an investable outcome or a bold technology goal is certainly something that the Quad could pull off together, actually co-design something together. And I think that, you know, to tell you just a very brief story within DoD, there was this story of allies and partners trying to design out interoperability issues. It was something called Mojo and Trax. It happened through an organization called Joint Special Operations Command. They were thinking of how allies and partners show up to an objective and everything they have is not inherently interoperable. We tried to calculate the cost of lack of interoperability across that, and the way it was solved was just a bold, audacious technology objective at their level, like the bomb or the moon. And what they said is, in my parlance, design it out. Make everything speak to everything. And then people start doing what molar sucking, like, ooh, that's like, you know, it's difficult, and, you know, that happens in the room, and then eventually they said, the operator said, I don't think you understand what I'm saying. Here's the bar. Design it out. And so then now we have this incredible capability that works across allies and partners that helps do interoperability across data links. And there's so much more that could be done to create Rosetta Stones in that space. Quad could do things like that.
Thank you so much.
If I could, and I'll double down, and this is one last nod to Deputy Secretary of Defense Hicks. You know, adhere to the data decrees that we've established. They're bold. Our department, I'm certain Margie spends a lot of time. How are we going to track data decree implementation? And you know, inside our department, we're getting better at it. But if we can put that type of a marker down with our Five Eyes partners, with, you know, the different groupings of allies and partners, I think we're probably going to be in a better place. And what I can tell you is our partners and allies appreciate us taking a leadership stance and signaling where we're going in that area as well, because it gives them a target to shoot at. It gives them an opportunity to say, so if I can abide by these data decrees, this open data standard architecture that the Department of Defense is declaring, then I'll be able to show up on that objective and be interoperable. I think the problem that we do know, though, is we still show up with gear that was built in the 70s and compute that was built in the 60s. And so we've got a long way to go in figuring out what that really looks like in true implementation.
Thank you so much.
Everyone, please join me in thanking our panelists. This has been an outstanding discussion. Thank you all for taking the time. This was fantastic. For those of you here, we'll have a little reception out.